Well, good morning, everybody. Thanks so much for joining us this morning. Thanks so much to Kate and to the Nashua Chamber who understood the need for this consulting in these unprecedented times, and really made sure that this happened in a quick manner. So really appreciate that. Thanks, and thanks to all of you for joining and taking time out of your day. So my name is Ryan Robinson. I'm the Chief Service Officer of Mainstay Technologies. We're a New Hampshire-based IT services and information security services firm. And given the nature of this webinar format, what I'd ask is that we'll do question and answers, but we'll do them at the end instead of doing them as we go, just because it's a little bit easier to function that way. I tend to be one where I do in-person trainings, love to have questions as we go, but in this it's usually better to wait to the end. However, with that said, what I'd ask you to do is to enter the questions as we go. So rather than waiting to the end to type in your questions, type them as you think of them. Usually there's the questions end up being better and more nuanced that way. And another thing to note, that don't feel stressed about taking copious notes. As you can see on your screen there, if you simply email our communications manager, Corey Hoyt, choyt@mstech.com, he'll send you the full detailed notes on this. So don't feel like you've got to stress and type fast. My goal really is to talk fast and to give you a lot of information in this that's actionable, that you can take away, and for you to be able to dive into the details later, as there's individual elements you want to integrate. So we'll send you the notes, and so no stress on that. So let's talk about technology best practices for working remotely. So the situation that we find ourselves in is we have the need to adapt fast. The coronavirus has changed the market dramatically. I mean, just in a matter of days, really. But weeks. We've been in sort of a partial or full quarantine for what now, 3 weeks, call it. And some people started that a little bit earlier. Some people started that a little bit later. But in New Hampshire, we had, just think back a few weeks ago, we had to make this change to being a remote workforce almost overnight, because the governor had announced on a Sunday evening that schools were closing, and people immediately, the next morning, practically had to figure out, okay, what am I going to do for childcare? How am I going to move remote so I can be there for my kids when they don't have school? And it was just, who would have predicted that we would be in the situation that we're in, even 2 months ago. Now, the good news in this is the market has been, and technology has been, moving step by step over the last several years towards enabling a fully remote workforce. You think about the proliferation of mobile devices, cloud-hosted infrastructure and applications, increased internet bandwidth, all of these virtual communication tools. I mean, where would we be if this happened in 1980? The challenge, though, here's the challenges in this, is that many organizations are really, I think, still treating this as like a temporary challenge, thinking that once May 4th comes around, or whatever the date ends up being, that we'll end up going back to normal, and we're just putting kind of stopgap measures into place right now to get us through. Instead of really taking full advantage of this moment and truly rethinking how we're doing our business, what our business workflows are, how we're utilizing technology. And in my mind, even if a miracle cure is found and we are all able to quote unquote go back to normal, and social distancing ends tomorrow, I mean, the world has changed. It's just, the world has changed. I mean, some people think that the handshake is never coming back in Western civilization. I don't know if that's true or not, but think of even how much you and your friends and your colleagues have been using things like Zoom, right? The platform we're using today, and how much more comfortable people are with using those kinds of tools, even just in the last few weeks. Is it likely that we're going to go back to these organizations saying, no, you always have to be in the office? Well, no, probably not. There's probably a sense in which that is going to change permanently. Even if it doesn't change 100% and we don't stay 100% remote, it's very unlikely that we're going to go back to 0%. And I think there are many examples of that, where the culture has changed, the business world has changed, And so instead of thinking of this as being a stopgap measure, instead, I think we would do well to think of this as being more of an opportunity to how we can improve our organizations, how we can become more efficient, how we can use technology more effectively than we have ever before. And so I think the challenge is getting over that mentality. Also, many organizations are just playing fast and loose with security right now. When you're navigating change, you're not in the physical office anymore. It's very easy to not pay attention to security, and yet the hackers are not taking time off in this, and they're seeing this as a real opportunity. And we're seeing a massive uptick in phishing email scams related to coronavirus. We're seeing a lot of people being socially engineered through this process as they're navigating change. And we're seeing a lot of organizations not really take security seriously in this. They're trying to get people to work from home, but not really thinking about some of the security ramifications, both technical and organizational. And then lastly, I think we're seeing the challenge of many organizations having moved to a remote workforce, but not really being intentional about improving the culture of their organization through it. Sometimes it's like, how can we maintain our culture through it? But I think that there are opportunities to actually improve our company cultures through this, and I want to talk about that as we go through this presentation. So those are the challenges, but I think that they're challenges that can be overcome. However, we're going to have to adapt fast. We're going to have to adapt fast in terms of our usage of technology, our security protocols, and how we're thinking about security in our organizations. And we're going to have to adapt to this new cultural situation that we find ourselves in. So what I want to do today is really give you think of it as like a playbook. And that playbook has 3 large categories and a number of different individual plays within them. Those 3 categories are proper technology, security layers and workflows, and cultural intentionality. So let's start with proper technology. I'll warn you also in advance that I'm not finding myself needing to cough very often. This is like the worst time in human history to cough publicly. If you cough publicly, everyone's like, oh no, you've got it, or something's wrong. But I'm finding that when I talk a lot, I do end up coughing. So I'm hoping I don't have anything. It's only when I in one of these kinds of presentations that I'm talking a lot that I cough. So forgive me in advance if I cough in your ears. All right, so let's talk about the technology landscape and what your organization can do, what you can have in your playbook to move to a fully remote organization, really take advantage of this moment. So when you think about your on-site technology that you've had historically, right? You think you have your server environment, you have individual applications that you utilize, you have your computers and other endpoints, so tablets or mobile devices. You have your dual monitors and peripheral devices and printers and copiers and scanners and keyboards and mice. You have your phones, and you have other virtual communication tools. Essentially what we're in is in a moment where we can rethink all of those categories and say, okay, what makes not only more sense right now as we're living through this transition, but what makes more sense even long term? How do we become a more remote enabled workforce that's going to most likely be the requirement moving forward anyway? So let's start by talking about servers. If you look at your the left-hand column here, I talk specifically about servers. Essentially, servers, right? If you have a business network or business environment, you probably have a server room with some servers in the back closet, unless you're fully cloud enabled already. But most businesses still have some sort of local server infrastructure. Now, those servers, all they are really just big computers that have a different kind of operating system that provide different things. They provide application hosting for the core applications you use in your business. They provide file management, and then they provide individual services like individual security services, account management services, and so on. So essentially, if you think through the categories of things that your server provides for you, if you can offload those services that are being provided by your servers, then you can be either in a fully serverless environment or at least in a cloud-hosted server environment. So I want to talk through those options. So you basically think of it, you have 3 options for your server environment. Either one, you stay local and you just access those local resources remotely in a secure way. Option 2 is you move those servers from local hardware to cloud-based hardware, where you are lifting and shifting those into cloud-hosted environments, or you can go fully serverless altogether. So the first option here on the left is moving to a cloud-hosted server environment. This is sometimes referred to as infrastructure as a service. Essentially what this means is that that physical device that you've got, that physical host, physical server host that you have in your server room, you can essentially trade that, buying that equipment and owning it for renting it in data centers. Data centers are really what people mean when they say the cloud, right? The cloud is when you access your information or applications or data via the internet, but that data still lives somewhere. All that information still lives on physical hardware. It just lives in data centers, these geo-redundant data centers where they have many, many server hosts all lashed together in very secure environments. And so your first option is to consider moving your server infrastructure to a data center. And you have really two options in that. One is the private cloud, which is individual data centers. You might have heard of something called Rackspace, for instance. Rackspace is a privately host or privately owned, where you can sort of buy your own server space in one of their data centers. But the other option is to move to a public cloud. And we're big fans of public cloud offerings. So the big three there are Microsoft's Azure platform, Amazon's web services, so Amazon Web Services or AWS, and then the Google Cloud. We're particularly big fans of Microsoft from a pricing standpoint and from a flexibility and management standpoint. But typically, public cloud is going to give you the highest level of security. It's going to give you the highest, the greatest ability to scale up or down, depending on whether your organization is expanding or contracting. And many organizations right now are contracting. You may find yourself that, the 30 employees you have now are going to go down to 15 or 20, and you may not need the same kind of resource allocation. So if you're in a private cloud environment or a local environment where you own the hardware, well, you've made your investment. You can't really turn that dial down very easily. Whereas if you were in the public cloud, with a couple of clicks of a mouse, you can downgrade the number of services that you're requiring or the amount of resources that are being required and lower your costs very quickly. So cloud-hosted infrastructure is a really great potential option versus having that local infrastructure in your office. Okay, option two. Option two is going fully serverless. So if you want to go fully serverless, look at this middle row here. The way to go fully serverless is to essentially outsource to the cloud your application hosting, your file hosting, and then your account management. So let's say, for instance, that on your local server currently you have QuickBooks. Well, if you move to QuickBooks Online, which is Intuit's cloud-hosted version of QuickBooks, well, now you don't need to rely on your local server environment to host that anymore, right? Now, quick caveat is QuickBooks Online doesn't have all the same functionality that regular QuickBooks does. However, they're making a lot of improvements to that. And in fact, many people prefer QuickBooks Online to locally hosted QuickBooks because of a lot of the improvements they've made, even in the last year. So if you've looked at that in the past but haven't looked at it recently, it's worth another look. Or let's say you're a nonprofit and you do a lot of your account management and use as a CRM and financial management, use Blackbaud. Well, you can move to their NXT platform, which is their hosted platform, and now you can offload that off your server. Now, same thing would be the case for file hosting. Let's say you have a file server and you host a lot of individual files on that file server. Well, instead, you could think about using Microsoft's OneDrive more expansively or fully. You could use Dropbox for Business or Citrix ShareFile solution. Any one of those are really ways in which you can kind of replicate the functionality that your file server provides for you, but now you can access it wherever you have access to the internet. There are good local sync tools that make it so that you can pull those very quickly and easily up from your local computer, as opposed to having to pull all of the data down from the internet. And so that's, the sort of second category. And then the third are the individual services that your server provides. So for instance, managing your Active Directory or all of the individual accounts, that's something your server provides for you. Well, there are cloud hosted options for you. For instance, Microsoft has a tool called Azure AD, Azure Active Directory Services, where you can get that same exact thing in a cloud hosted environment. So again, if you can offload these categories of requirements from your local environment, now you not only can get rid of your local server, you don't even have to go and use a cloud-hosted server, which can be more expensive, but now you can go fully serverless altogether. Now your last option is you stay with the local server environment you have, and then you just utilize either VPN, virtual private network, which basically puts you, you could say, effectively in your work environment, but in a remote location, and with all the same security controls and permissions and all of that. Or you can even use something called remote desktop services, where you're essentially logging in from home to a computer at your office that's accessing those network resources. Now, we're going to talk a little bit more about security later on in this presentation, but the one key thing to remember is that if you utilize a local server environment still, and you need to access it remotely using VPN or remote desktop, make sure that you have two-factor authentication that's surrounding that. Two-factor authentication or multi-factor authentication is when you have to have an additional factor or additional form of authentication beyond just a password. So that's where you have to get that secondary code that's texted to your phone or something, which then requires you to, in order to access that information, you not only have to have a password, which is something that could be known or stolen or cracked with a free password cracking tool, but it's something that now that person who's trying to get in would have to not only have stolen that, but then they'd also have to have stolen your phone, or if you're using your thumbprint or retinal scan, they're going to have to get really creative to be able to steal that from you. So if you are logging into VPN from your home regularly and not having to use a secondary factor, you really should work with IT to make sure that they implement some sort of form of multi-factor authentication in there. Okay, so that's the server environment. Let's talk next about the individual devices that you're using. So these are called, endpoints as a larger category, but endpoints really just mean all of the devices that you are accessing those resources from. So whether they be laptops, desktops, smartphones, tablets, etc. Now, in a word, what this means is to move to a fully remote workforce, you need to have laptops, and to work with your IT partner to ensure that your laptops are, first of all, business class machines. Business class means that they should have solid chassis, they should have proper ports, and in particular, they should have no adware or bloatware, which is often what you'll find if you go and try to buy a machine down at Best Buy or Staples. Make sure they have proper warranties. You should have 3-year warranties at a minimum. This is your, excuse me, this is, your laptop is your primary tool. It's like the hammer for a carpenter. And so you want to make sure that you can get those fixed next day if there's hardware issues, and proper warranties are key in that. You should also consider having some spare machines. The industry standard is to have 3 to 5% of your fleet be backup machines. So if you have 100, let's say 100 computers in your workforce, you should have 3 to 5 spare machines at any given time, that if someone's down, you can immediately get a laptop to them, a spare laptop to them and be up and running very quickly. Now, I say this to you, and this desire to move to laptops at the worst possible moment, because currently demand for laptops is extremely high and supply chains are very weak. And so, desperate times call for desperate measures. And so if you're in a situation where you say, look, we've tried to work with IT, we can't get laptops that we need fast enough, or all we've got are home laptops or whatever, let me give you some options. So option one is, remember, you can bring your desktop computer home. Sometimes people think of those as being so immobile that they're like physically attached to the desks at their office. But no, you can bring your laptop or your desktop computers home. It's a little bit more of a pain, but the key to remember if you do that is you're going to have some long Ethernet cables, because most of the time people have their home offices, up in their upstairs, and their router may be down in their basement. So you may need to get a 75-foot, 100-foot Ethernet cable. And so make sure that you don't just think you can go and unplug that machine and bring it home. You're going to have to work with IT to make sure you have the right cabling. Your second option is you can get a non-business class machine from a retail store, like Best Buy or Staples or whatever. However, when you do that, if you do that, make sure that you really consult with IT on, make sure you've got the right specifications on those machines. There's nothing worse than if you've got certain applications you need to run, you go buy a machine, you think you're good to go, and now your computer's running really slowly because you don't have the right specs. Make sure you have the right ports. This is one of the common pitfalls of buying retail machines is you'll get the machine and then you bring it home and you realize, oh, it doesn't have all the USB ports that I need, or it doesn't have a USB-C port, or it doesn't have a VGA port that I need for my secondary monitor or whatever. So check your ports, and then also look at your video card and make sure that it has the right video card. Many non-business class machines have really low-end video cards, and if you're doing anything high-end, especially like if you're using, if you have you're an engineer and you're using CAD, but even other financial management programs often will have higher video card demands, and if you don't have an appropriate video card, it will your screen won't render appropriately, or sometimes the application won't even load. So you can talk to IT and say, hey, what are the video card requirements for that key applications that I use? Again, look at warranty length and coverage, and also look at the return policy. Oftentimes these return policies, when supply chains are getting weaker, get much stricter. And so make sure that you don't put yourself in a situation where you can't bring the computer back. Your third option is to use a home computer, and many people are doing that now and saying, oh, well, I don't have desktop machine, so I'm just going to use a home computer. First thing I'd say on that is don't, prioritize getting a desktop machine or getting a dedicated non-business class machine that's dedicated specifically for work over using a home computer. And if you have to use a home computer, consider making sure that that's monitored or managed by your IT. Have centrally managed antivirus on that machine. And also it should not be shared with any non-employees. So if you have a home machine, it shouldn't be that you're using that during the day for work and then at night, your teenage son is on there, you or your husband or whoever, because they could unwittingly pull malware onto that computer by downloading a free screensaver or clicking a link in an email or clicking a link on a website that is malicious. And that could then, once you log back into VPN, now that can go in and corrupt your work data or client data or all kinds of things. So if you have to use a home machine, make sure that it's dedicated, not being used by anyone else, and have it centrally managed and monitored by your IT team. Okay, let's talk now about some key peripheral devices. Now, one of the things that I have seen, so Stay Work Play, many of you are familiar with that organization. Stay Work Play has this really fun hashtag that they have rolled out called hashtag Stay at Home Work and Play. And people are submitting their home setups. And what's fascinating is if you look at that, you'll see that a lot of the home setups are just basically a computer, a laptop computer, and a cup of coffee. There's no peripheral devices. There's no dual monitors. And this, I think, goes back to what I said earlier, where a lot of people are still treating this as like a temporary thing. We're just going to do this for a short amount of time, and then we'll be back up and running. But this is most likely a much longer term situation, and we should really think about the kinds of additional peripheral devices that are going to help us be more effective and efficient. So number one on that list is dual monitors. You should be using at least a second monitor, or if not a third. I have in my home office that I'm doing this from right now, I have 3 additional monitors plus my individual laptop monitor. And I'll tell you, it would be very difficult for me to go back, depending on how many applications you're using at any given time, how long you're on your computer for. There is just nothing like having sort of a desk that's wider, you could say. Microsoft did a study several years ago that showed that people have, this number, a 10 to 49% efficiency increase when they have a dual monitor. That's a wild number. Now that's a big range, right? 10 to 49%. Well, that range is depending on how many applications you have open at any given time, how much you're having to switch back and forth, how much time you spend on your computer every day. So it can be a range there. But many people in the modern workforce are going to be at that higher level. I mean, imagine if you had a desk, where you had a physical desk and you worked with physical paper. And every time you wanted to get a new piece of paper, you had to take, you flip through the pages, pick up the other piece of paper, put it on the top, and you had a paper-sized desk. That would be miserable. And then imagine if you get a new big desk, right, where you can spread all that out. That's analogous to what having multiple monitors is like. They cost between 125 to 150 bucks a pop. And when you think about, staff salary, that is a drop in the bucket in terms of how much you pay your team from salary and benefits. And to think that you could increase, 10 to 49% from their time just by spending 125, 150 bucks on another monitor, that's pretty powerful. So strongly recommend that. Number two is if you have dual monitors, often what you're going to want to have is a docking station. So if you look at your screen, underneath the computer, the picture of the computer screen, there's an arrow pointing to this little black box. That's what a modern day docking station looks like. It's not like the old trays where you would set your laptop on a tray with fans under it and so on. What these provide are there multiple ports on those devices. So you'll have like a port for HDMI and VGA and display port and other kinds of, double, triple, quadruple monitors. There's multiple USB ports, USB-C ports, and they make it so that any other peripheral device you have, you can just plug into that. The newer ones also will have power coming directly from those docking stations as well. So literally you can put your laptop down and in one cord going into your laptop, all of your peripheral devices will turn on. You can have your printers and copiers and multiple monitors and external keyboards and mice, and all of that will immediately be ready to go, and it'll be supplying power. Now, another category would be keyboard and mice, and I know that sounds like so simple. It's like almost not even worth saying, but again, it's fascinating to me how many people do work on their computers all day long and use just when they're in a remote workforce, they just use their laptop keyboard. And that is not a great idea. There's major efficiency decreasers in that. Partially because, those of you who have like a maybe not the highest quality trackpad on your laptop, for instance, your thumb hits the trackpad and then the mouse flies off into a different spot, or you accidentally, delete something that you've been typing. All of those hassles and frustrations. If you have an external keyboard and mouse, whether it's wireless or wired, there's a major efficiency increaser in that. And I'd also recommend that you look at ergonomic keyboards and mice, which are kind of tilted differently. So if you have an ergonomic keyboard, you can hold your hands in a much more comfortable position, which actually allows you and your team to work more steadily, more effectively, more comfortably, and more efficiently. So another one to really consider. All right, now let's talk about communication tools. I would not be surprised if half the people joining us today were joining specifically to learn more about some of these communication tools. So let me give you sort of two ways of thinking about this. What our tendency is to often think of communication tools as being phones, like that being the primary audio communication tool, and then video conferencing for video communication. I want to encourage you to think about a different category that combines those two, called unified communications. Unified communications is basically where you have a single communication platform that provides all of your communication tools, from phones to video chat to phone conferencing to instant messaging to screen sharing, the whole 9 yards, all in the same platform. That is really more of the ideal of what we're shooting for in the modern remote workforce, rather than thinking about all of those tools being individual, being different systems that we're using, different platforms. And what I'm seeing right now is a lot of people asking, like, okay, what should I use for video conferencing? And not really thinking, what should I be using for my unified communications platform? So what I want to share with you, I want to talk to you about 3 different solutions. One is Microsoft Teams, there on the left. The one in the middle is Zoom, and the third is the G Suite, or particularly Google Hangouts and some of their communication tools. So Microsoft Teams, let's start there. So Microsoft Teams, I'll share with you some pros and cons of each of these tools. So pros for Microsoft Teams. If, for one, you are in the Microsoft ecosphere. So actually, let me back up, forgive me. What Microsoft Teams is a unified communications platform, and it is one in a way that neither Zoom or the G Suite are. So I'm sharing with this one with you first, because it's really the best of the platforms that I'm going to be talking with you about. It provides all of those things that I was referencing, all of the different communication tools, all in one integrated platform. Now, the pros of Teams are, one, that it is a unified communications platform. It can do all of those things, including be your phone system, which is something that neither of the other platforms can do. So a lot of organizations right now have moved to fully remote work, and are forwarding their clients like their cell phone numbers and things like that, and not really navigating the phone system portion effectively, especially if you had to go to fully remote and let's say you have an on-premise digital phone system. Those are not, ideal for this kind of scenario. So what you can do is, if you move to Teams, you can actually have Teams be your phone system. And even if, let's say, it takes you a little time to work with your IT partner to integrate and set up all of your call trees and everything that you've had historically, you can still, even just overnight practically, make Teams at least a kind of functional phone system by forwarding your phone number, your key business phone number, to Teams, getting licensing just for the individuals who answer phones, and then those individuals can then transfer from Teams natively. They can transfer calls to individual cell phones. So you can still utilize your cell phones in an effective manner, but still keep that main number up and active and functioning, and having the same workflows where it's going to the same key people, receptionists or whoever you have answering those phones. So that's a huge advantage for Team, huge pro. Second is that if you are in the Microsoft ecosphere already, there is a ton of both cost advantages and integration advantages. So from a cost perspective, you may already, and you probably are already, paying for Teams, at least some of the functionality within Teams. So it's more a question of whether you're utilizing it more than whether you're paying for it. Also, if you are in the Microsoft ecosphere, I'll give you an example. Let's say that you are creating a calendar invite. Well, with one click of a mouse, you can turn any Outlook calendar invite into a Teams meeting, and it will immediately populate in the body of the calendar invite. It'll automatically populate a link that people can click on to join the Teams meeting, or a phone number to join a phone conference. It's incredibly effective, and most people most people in the business community use Outlook to create meeting events already, and so that just makes it super convenient. Also, there's a lot of integration with other apps, SurveyMonkey, Salesforce, MailChimp, and so on. And you can have a ton of people too. Even if you're a larger business, you can have meetings over Teams that have up to 250 people. And you could even do live events or broadcast events or webinars that go up to 10,000 people. So there's plenty of scalability there. The cons for Teams, and honestly, there's not many. I mean, I think the cons for Teams are mainly that you're just going to have to pay for additional licenses for different additional functionality that you want. So if, let's say, you wanted to use it for your phone system, you're going to have to pay a separate cost for that. However, I don't even know that that should be considered a con, in the sense that, you're going to have to pay for your phone system regardless, right? And so it's more a question of where you're paying and who you're paying for that phone system. And the beautiful thing about Teams is that it's actually going to be cheaper from a support perspective anyway. Now, the one place that it can be more expensive, and this isn't specific to Teams, but this is specific to any phone system that you're going to use, any kind of soft phone system that you're going to use, which is a software-based phone system, is the headsets. When you move to that, you're not going to have your physical handsets anymore. You're going to have these guys, and depending on the quality of what you want to buy, they can be expensive. But typically, overall, your overall cost is still going to be lower in moving to something like Teams. All right, let's talk about Zoom next. So the pros of Zoom. So Zoom is, unlike Microsoft Teams, Zoom is not a unified communications platform so much as it's primarily a video conferencing tool. And many people have been using Zoom lately. I mean, if you were one of the lucky ones who invested in Zoom, back before January, you're probably a pretty happy person right now, because their stock is going through the roof and outperforming pretty much everybody. So many people are adopting this individually and corporately. So the pros of Zoom are, one, that it's sort of ecosystem less, in the sense that regardless of whether you use Google primarily, or you use Microsoft primarily, or you use Citrix primarily, or you're an open source platform shop, whatever your technology base foundation is, you can use Zoom. So you can set up, an individual account or a corporate account very, very easily. Another pro is just that Zoom has done a good job with their technology. So for instance, Zoom tends to be have fewer lags, fewer technical glitches. I mean, their technology around, for instance, how they manage bandwidth throttling. So that Zoom does a good job of understanding how much bandwidth an individual user is using, and then automatically compresses and adjusts pixels within the video, or even changes the quality of the audio so that you have more of a steady stream of communication. Now, we're using Zoom today, and Murphy's Law says that in like 5 minutes, we're going to have a technical glitch with this Zoom. But as a general rule, Zoom tends to be very stable from a technology perspective and a performance perspective. And also, if you do a lot of webinars, they're natively built really well for webinars. I mean, we're using Zoom for this webinar today. Although I will say that Teams is getting better and better at that. And I think even at Mainstay, we're probably going to be moving to Teams even for webinars. They've been putting a lot of R&D and investment into that. But historically speaking, Zoom has really been the top of the food chain there. Now, the cons for Zoom is that, for the advantage of not being integrated into a native system like Google or Microsoft, well, that's also the same thing. That's also the con, right? So that there's not the same kind of integration with those other tools. And if your organization, as many businesses are utilizing Microsoft, Outlook and utilizing the Office suite and so on, and have your email through Office 365 and so on, then you're going to lose a lot of those integration advantages if you utilize Zoom. And then, of course, the last just being that this can't replace your phone system. And so it can't fully scale out the same way that Microsoft Teams can. All right, so let's talk about Google. Now, Google, there's a lot of pros of Google. Now, one is if you're in the Google ecosphere, so same thing with the Microsoft. It's like if you're a school system or you're an organization that's already in that, you're using Gmail primarily for your web client or your email client, you're in the Google Apps world, then there's a lot of integration points. Also, it's free for certain organizations like schools, Google Apps for Education. And I would say the biggest pro of Google is just that they are so user-friendly and intuitive with their software. I mean, even something like how they name their things. So like Google Hangouts is separated into two separate categories. One is Hangouts Meet and one is Hangouts Chat. Well, Hangouts Meet is what it sounds like. It's for meetings and conference calls and those kinds of things in a more of a business setting, whereas Hangouts Chat is much more for one-on-one personal kind of engagement. So they name things well. Their interfaces are really intuitive and easy to use. It's like one of those things where you could set up a 5-year-old and they would be able to figure it out very, very quickly. And so there's a real advantage to that. If you're a small, micro business, let's say you're a sole proprietor, Google can often be a really great option for you if you're not in the Microsoft world. A lot of sole proprietors will utilize Google Sheets and Gmail for their mail client. And so that can be a really great option, especially for smaller organizations as well. Now, the cons for Google, same thing. If you're in the Microsoft ecosphere, not ideal, and it can't replace your phone system. So it can't fully scale out and be a true unified communications platform. All right, so let's talk now about the second play in the playbook, or the second series of plays in them, security. Now, as I referenced earlier, we have a big challenge right now where organizations are being really fast and loose with security because they're needing to change rapidly. Their individuals are needing to rapidly handle that, navigate those new workflows and so on that they may not be used to. Individual users are more likely also to fall for social engineering tricks when they are in a new environment and are navigating that change. And they're already your number one risk. And so they're definitely going to be even more so now. Also, home networks don't have the same sort of security protocols and security layers as the business networks have historically. And so you take all those combined, well, the threat actors out there, the hackers know this and really are having open season. They're having a field day right now. We're seeing a massive spike in social engineering scams and phishing scams, and not just a spike in them, but a spike in the ones that are working. So let me give you some key tips around this. So first of all, multi-factor authentication. I referenced it earlier, what multi-factor authentication is. I would strongly recommend that, especially during this time, that you consider putting multi-factor authentication around a few key areas. First are bank accounts. Any bank account that you have that has any substantial amount of money in it, whether it's a business account or a personal account, you should have some sort of multi-factor authentication option. And if your bank doesn't give you an MFA option, then in all seriousness, you should consider changing banks because it can be reflective of real concerns on what that bank's security protocols are internally. Also, email. Email is one of those things where people often object and say, I don't want to have to, enter a secondary code or go onto my smartphone and click yes on an app every time I open my email. Well, good news is that that's not what you have to do if you utilize email. For instance, if you're a Microsoft Office 365 subscriber and that's how you have your email hosted, you can basically you can think of that secondary code as being cached under your particular system. And so you don't have to put it in all the time. The only time you'd ever have to put in that secondary code is if, let's say, you were, utilizing a different computer than your own and you were going onto outlook.com and signing in, then you would have to. But if you're just using your laptop, opening your email, you'll never have to enter that secondary code other than when you first create the account at the beginning. Also, VPN and any other remote access tools should be surrounded by two-factor authentication. And then really anywhere else that sensitive data lives. So whether it's in key applications that you have, I mean, if you have a CRM solution or financial solutions that have a lot of sensitive data, then is there a two-factor authentication option for those? And most vendors now have them. So it's more and typically they're free. So it's more just looking up and saying, hey, if you use X application, it's like just Google X application multi-factor authentication, and the option should come up, or you can reach out to customer service to set that up. Next is staff training. As I mentioned, your users are your number one security risk, and that's the case even when they're in the office. So you need to ensure that you have security awareness training as part of a new your new hire onboarding process. And those trainings should also be updated at minimum annually because the threats are constantly changing. And even different seasons of the year, we're in tax season. And so there's a big increase in scams related to the IRS. And so the threats are always evolving. And so the training needs to keep evolving as well. And so let me give you some examples. For instance, I mean, one of the key parts of training is training your team on secure email practices. So let me give you a few that you can even cut and paste if you get the notes from Corey, and you can send along to your team. If you see fishy emails or your team sees fishy emails, don't click on links within those emails. And in fact, I would encourage you to not click links, period, in emails. There are times, sure, exceptions. There are always exceptions to every rule. There are times where you have to click links in an email. But most of the time, you just go to the site where you would normally click, where you're expecting to go, and then log into that site, and you're going to be able to get the information you want. So let's say you get an email from Amazon saying track my package. Don't click the track my package button. Just go to Amazon.com, make sure you're logged in, and then you'll be able to track the package there. Or if your bank account gives you the statement is ready to view, don't click the link in that email, because that email could be very easily, someone with basic Photoshop skills could recreate what looks like a TD Bank email and then put a malicious link behind it. Now, the link that you never want to click, this is often counterintuitive, but the link you never want to click is the unsubscribe button. And why is that? Well, that's the one link that is almost a guarantee. If there is a link that's malicious in an email, that's the one that it's going to be, because that's the one that whoever created that phishing email knows is most likely to be clicked. So instead, what you want to do is mark that email as spam, and that will help treat your spam filter or teach your spam filter what to look for, what to avoid. And then lastly, make sure that you are voice verifying. Anytime you see an email that, if you think you got an email from your boss or from your CFO or whoever, and you're just not sure it's them, what you used to be able to do is open up a new email and say, hey, I got this email that looked like it was from you. Here's what it said. Was that actually from you? The problem is now, if their account itself is compromised, you're just going to get an email back that says, yes, that was me. Please click on that link, or, click that attachment. Instead, now you have to actually call the person and say, I got this email. Was it actually from you? So voice verify, voice verify. And lastly, establish an information security program for your organization. And what I mean by this is it's easy to assume that what it means for your organization to be secure, it means that security is all about technical controls. It's all about having the right firewall and the right antivirus and the right, if you ask, probably 7 out of 10 business owners and business leaders, and you said, hey, how secure is your organization? their mind is immediately going to go to, well, I should ask IT. I should ask my IT team, my IT department, to figure out how secure we are. But that shows an inherent lack of understanding that security is both about your technical controls, but also your administrative and your physical controls. In other words, security is largely about your organization and how you share data and what your individual practices are as a business and your user training and all of that. That is all more important typically than those technical controls, because not to underestimate the importance of technical controls, but think of it. If your technical controls are, let's say, creating a wall around your organization, well, if you have really poor, insecure workflows, or human beings that work for you that are quick to click links in email and fall for phishing scams and send sensitive data out unwittingly, well, you could create these high walls and these thick walls, and if your users just, or your workflows just open the doors in those walls and leave them open, then none of those technical security controls are going to be all that helpful. So establishing an information security program is a way of saying, establish a larger framework for security for your organization. And you typically will do that. You start that process by getting what's called a risk assessment, where you evaluate the risks in a holistic sense in your business. And you understand what your gaps are in your technical controls and your administrative controls and your physical controls. And then from there, then you can start building the policies, the procedures, the workflows, the training requirements. You can implement phishing testing for your users and user training and dark web monitoring and managing the compliances that you're under. But it all starts with that risk assessment process. So really consider working with a partner on getting a risk assessment. And remember, it's not just about the technical controls. It's really about having the right information security program. And those technical security controls are going to live within that program. Okay. So the last series of plays here. Culture, cultural intentionality. So ultimately what we need to realize is that culture is not going to stop developing in this time. Your company culture is going to continue to develop. It's just a question of whether you're going to be intentional about pointing that culture development in the right direction or not. You know, at Mainstay, we think a lot about culture, and we've been really fortunate, honestly. I mean, we won last 2 years in a row. We've won the best companies to work for in New Hampshire. We were number 7 on the list a couple years ago, and last year we were number 5 on the list. And you know, that's not to brag. I mean, largely that's because we have an incredible team of people that all work together and all practice integrity above all else, and we just have an incredible team. But we have had to be very intentional about building, developing, and cultivating all of that to help it grow. And that's the same thing for all of us. And when we get into a situation where we're in a fully remote work environment, we lose some of the tools in our culture building toolbox, right? We lose the ability to shape the physical environment that our team lives in. You know, you're not going to go down to your team member's individual house and create their workspace for them. We lose also a lot of that physical engagement that helps to build those relationships and build that culture. And so I would argue that we're in a moment where we have to be even more intentional than we've ever had to be before, because we've lost some of those advantages. But I also think, as I alluded to at the beginning of the presentation, I think we're in a moment where we have an opportunity to actually improve, not just maintain, but improve the cultures that we live in. And so let me give you a few ideas around this. So the first is, we need to check in with our teams and hold them accountable, not just for their work process, or excuse me, work product, but their work process. I said the joke before I said the punchline before I told the joke. We need to work, we need to hold our teams accountable for not just what they're delivering to us, right? It's so easy to think that what we're trying to get our teams to do is, you know, delivering these things to our clients, or, you know, individual support staff to deliver these things to our team. But instead, we need to think about how we help our teams cultivate better work processes that are going to help them live happier, healthier lives while they're isolated, while they're not physically present. And again, not just for today, but in the future when remote work becomes much more the norm. So some examples and some ideas around that are, for instance, encourage your team to have dedicated separate workspaces in their home offices. You'd be shocked to probably realize how many of your team members and how many people worldwide will do their work if they're working from home, will sit on their bed and put their laptop on their lap so they're sitting in their bed, or sit on their couch and put their laptop on their lap on the couch. That's not healthy, both for your back, for your health, for your psychology. It's really important that we have dedicated separate places where we can go, okay, this is where I work, this is where I play, this is where I hang out with my children. And when those get blended, it's really not healthy. I'll also encourage your team to implement clear daily work routines as part of their work plan. So times where they get up and they start work, when you don't have to have the social pressure of being at the office at 8 a.m. and no one's going to be asking you about that. It's very easy to just be like, oh, I'll start work whenever. And the primary concern in that is not that you're not going to get as much work product out of your team. The primary concern is for their own health and psychology and emotional stability. Having those routines, it's not just children that thrive on routines and consistency. We all do. And you think of like the circadian rhythms related to your sleep patterns. So much of your health is related to, are you going to bed at the same time? Are you getting up at the same time? Are you being consistent with that? And so check in with your team on that kind of thing. I also think that related to this, we need to model proper work to home shifts and conversely, home to work shifts. And this is even more critical. When you go to the physical office, right? You go to the office, you work, you're like, okay, this is what I'm doing now. Then you go home. And at least at the beginning, many people will grab their laptops at night and open them up and check email. But, at least at the beginning there, you go, okay, I'm going into a different mode. I have physically arrived at home. But we need to really strongly encourage our team members to do things like, changing their clothes when they're starting and ending their workday. Even if they're not dressing up and they're just putting on jeans and a polo instead of, sweatpants and a t-shirt, that makes a huge difference. Also, as managers, one of the things we can do for our team is be really careful about the example we're setting. So for instance, I know for me, my temptation is, after the kids go down to bed, to pop open the laptop and, get some of the emails that I wasn't able to get to during the day or whatever. But you can also utilize, I'm not familiar with this, but in Outlook, you can use the delay delivery option. You just click the delay delivery button and you can actually set, let's say you type an email at 8 p.m., that email will actually not be sent until 8 a.m. the next morning, which changes that. We can easily set a culture for our teams that says, hey, there shouldn't be any work to home shifts and it's all just work. And you don't ever know when you're going to get an email from me any time of the day. And that can set these subtle expectations for our teams. And so use that delayed delivery button liberally. And the best thing to do is, of course, for you yourself to have your own work to home shifts. And, the ideal is not to actually pick up the laptop at 8 p.m., but really hold yourself to very clear guidelines and schedules. And only in those exceptional moments where you need to do that, you utilize a tool like delayed delivery. Also, increase one-on-one and all team engagements. We need more communication in this to build a great culture than ever before. And so, for instance, turn that quarterly staff meeting that you had, turn that into a monthly staff meeting. Turn let's say the bi-weekly rhythm meeting that you have with individual team members and turn that into weekly ones or twice a week, but just make them shorter and have them over video conferencing. And in fact, that's another key thing, is really default to video. You really should be thinking that instead of, I know for me personally, I never want to create, send someone, especially, as of a month ago, I would never want to put someone on the spot by encouraging them to come to a video conference instead of a phone meeting, because, that it takes more out of you, right? Like you're seen, you're physically seen in a way that can make people feel almost exposed. But I think we need to create cultures in our organizations where it's an expectation that we actually communicate to our teams like, hey, look, we're in this situation. We need to see each other. We need to physically see our faces and connect in that more human way that visuals provide. And so we're going to default to video now for our meetings. And we're only going to go to phone meetings or a different type if that's absolutely necessary. And just set that expectation early on. You can also utilize a tool called Yammer, which is a Microsoft tool you can think of it as like Facebook for business. Many people don't want to, friend their colleagues or coworkers or whatever on Facebook, because they want to keep that separation between home and work and so on. But Yammer gives you an opportunity to do that, where it's a very informal. People feel free to share pictures and memes and things more informally, but still amongst their work colleagues. Going back to Teams that I mentioned earlier, Teams also allows you to use what are called Teams channels. And so you can set up channels for like individual departments in your company, for instance, and set those up to where, finance has their own Teams channel and they can share things, and there's sort of a constant chat that people can view that way. That's a little bit more informal as well. So increasing communication, really connecting with each other, and staying as human as we can in this is going to be key. So how can Mainstay help in all this? Well, here's what we have seen. Bluntly, we've seen that it's very easy when times are good, right, to kind of put up with ineffectual IT. When everyone's sort of fat and happy and money's flowing in, things don't feel as critical as when you're thinking you might have to lay off staff and you're having to really be cautious and careful and tighten your belt financially. And that we are in a moment in time where we just cannot be putting up with ineffectual IT. And so if you have that sense that, maybe your IT team or IT company was able to help you get remote, but maybe they're not bringing these kinds of recommendations to you, or maybe they helped everyone get connected, but it was very loose, and you're really not sure how focused on security they've been through it. All these things, all of these things matter so much more now than they even did a month ago, because jobs are on the line in this. I mean, the health of your business is on the line at this critical moment. It's like you care more about your doctor, you could say, when you're really ill than when you're healthy, right? You want to make a better decision about that doctor then. And so this is just a really appropriate time to say, hey, are we really working with the right partner? And I want to be clear. I mean, I'm the Chief Service Officer of Mainstay. I help oversee our service delivery. I'm not a sales guy for Mainstay. But I really believe in what we do and the value we provide, and in particular the value we're providing right now. We've been helping organizations to move into fully remote workspaces for years now, and so we feel really well prepared to help organizations from a security perspective, from an efficiency perspective. So we can help be your IT department if you are not satisfied with your current IT partner. But also, let's say you have an internal IT department you're very happy with, they've been doing a great job, but just in the busyness of all this and the scramble, and maybe even health concerns that you have internally, that they just need help and support. Well, we can help supplement and support them. And we have a separate dedicated team actually that helps internal IT organizations. So they work really, really well. All their workflows are designed to work with internal IT departments, as opposed to just being a comprehensive service provider. We can provide training and consulting on any of the individual things that we talked about today. And then we are also an information security team as well. So we're one of the only companies in New England that does both IT and information security. There are a lot of IT companies that will raise their hands and do technical security work, but we do all of the organizational side as well. So we can provide those kinds of comprehensive risk assessments to your organization. We can do compliance governance if you're under HIPAA, or you're in the DoD supply chain, or you have any PCI compliance that you need to navigate through, or you work with a lot of companies in Massachusetts or have a lot of employees in Massachusetts and are under the Massachusetts privacy law, 201 CMR 17. We can help with all the compliance governance with that. We can help with policy development. We have policy writers, secure workflow consulting, all of the information security. So if you feel like IT is taken care of, but you're really concerned about where you are from a security perspective, navigating these new waters, especially as you're thinking about changing all of your workflows, this is when security, you're sort of at the best opportunity to really look at your information security program as you're navigating change and as you're sort of rebuilding a lot of these organizational workflows. We can also do individual assessments. So if you're just not sure where you stand with things, we can do individual IT audits, or we can do security assessments, whichever those pieces that there's concern around. And we do that in a really non-salesy way. We don't have any commission salespeople at Mainstay, no one on commission or bonuses. And so we just provide really great consulting through that, give you great reports. And we're not using those as just anchor points to get into your organization. We really want to provide high value in those assessments. And then of course a call anytime. All right, so if you're interested in getting those notes, you see the email address above. Please feel free to let me know if there's any questions. I don't see any questions right now, and I'm hoping that that's just because I did such an incredible job of answering any questions as we went. But feel free certainly to after the fact. I know sometimes people just don't want to ask questions in this kind of public setting. So if you have any individual questions, feel free to pass those along to Corey, and we can make sure we get those questions answered for you. Really appreciate the time today. Thank you again to Kate and the Nashua Chamber. We love, one of my first jobs out of college was I worked on Main Street in Nashua. I have a lot of affinity for Nashua and the business community there. And don't hesitate to reach out to us if there's anything we can do to help you in this process. And please, everyone, be safe, be healthy, stay inside, and we'll all hopefully get through this together and get on the other end. I love the idea of thinking of this as being sort of, a hurricane is hitting us, hitting so many businesses, nonprofits. Instead of it being like us on a boat navigating those waters and having those waters crash down on us, let's think of implementing the things that we talked about today and being like submarines who go down underneath the water, can keep our organization smooth and steady through it, using the appropriate tools, using the appropriate workflows, and then come out on the other side of that hurricane. So hopefully we can all do that, and really, again, appreciate your attentiveness and your time, and wish all of you the best. Take care.